I am not weak anymore, and if that sentence makes you uncomfortable, good. Because comfort is where weakness was born in the first place, and before you scroll, before your mind tries to escape, let me say this slowly. This is not motivation. This is a declaration. This is the moment where excuses lose their oxygen and die quietly in the corner. Because weakness was never about muscles, or money, or talent. It was about hesitation. It was about waiting for permission. It was about looking at your own potential and asking the world if it was okay to use it. And today that ends. Because there was a version of me that flinched when life raised its voice. There was a version of me that overthought, delayed, explained, apologized for existing too loudly. There was a version of me that mistook patience for fear and humility for self-erasure. And that version paid the price in silence, in regret. In nights where the ceiling knew my doubts better than any human ever did. But here's the part nobody talks about. The breaking point doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly. It arrives when you realize you are tired of negotiating with your own limits. When you are exhausted from being polite to the same habits that are slowly killing your future. When you finally see that your softness has been abused by a world that only respects boundaries enforced with action, and that's when the shift happens. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but internally. Like a lock clicking into place. Because weakness was never that I fell, it was that I stayed down longer than necessary. Weakness was not failure. It was familiarity with failure. It was calling pain normal. It was romanticizing struggle instead of escaping it. And listen carefully now, because this is where the weak version of you stops breathing. The moment you stop asking, what if I fail? And start asking, what if I don't change? Because the real fear is not pain. It's repetition. It's waking up 5 years from now with the same excuses in a different outfit. And I saw that future. I saw myself older but not wiser. Tired but not disciplined. Busy but not progressing. And that vision terrified me more than any obstacle ever could. So I did something dangerous. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped waiting for motivation. I stopped announcing my goals like they were fragile dreams that needed approval. And instead I became quiet. Not weak quiet, but focused quiet. The kind of silence that sharpens you. The kind where your absence speaks louder than your presence ever did. Because weak people talk to feel important. Strong people move to become undeniable. And I realized that my emotions didn't need to be healed before action. They needed to be dragged behind action until they learned obedience. Because discipline doesn't care how you feel. And results. Don't ask if you're ready. And somewhere between the mornings I didn't want to wake up and the nights I didn't want to continue, something inside me hardened. Not into bitterness, but into clarity. And clarity is dangerous. Because once you see yourself honestly, you can never unsee it. You can never go back to pretending that your potential is optional. You can never again lie comfortably. And that's when weakness loses its grip. Because weakness feeds on confusion, on emotional chaos, on constant self-dialogue. But strength feeds on decisions, clean decisions, ruthless priorities. And I made one decision that changed everything. I will not betray myself anymore. Not for comfort, not for approval, not for temporary pleasure disguised as rest. Because every time I quit, every time I delay, every time I choose easy over necessary, I am teaching my mind that my word means nothing. And a man or a woman whose word means nothing to themselves will always feel weak no matter how loud they speak. So I rebuilt my word brick by brick. I started small, painfully small, boringly small, but consistent. Because weakness loves drama, and strength loves routine. Weakness wants transformation overnight, and strength commits to the process even when nothing seems to be changing. And here's the truth that stings. Motivation didn't save me. Standards did. Because when your standards rise, excuses fall automatically. And I raised mine to a level where weakness could no longer breathe. Where laziness felt embarrassing. Where procrastination felt expensive. Where discipline felt lighter than regret. And don't misunderstand me, I still feel fear. I still feel doubt. I still feel the urge to quit. But the difference is, I no longer negotiate with those feelings. I acknowledge them like noise outside my window and continue working inside. Because strength is not the absence of weakness, it's the refusal to obey it. And now when life hits, I don't ask why me. I ask, is that all? Because the same pressure that once crushed me now forges me. The same isolation that once hurt me now protects my focus. The same silence that once felt lonely now feels like an advantage. And the people who knew the old me won't recognize this version. Not because I changed my personality, but because I removed my limits. Because I stopped shrinking to fit spaces that were never designed to hold my ambition. And here's the part you need to hear if you're still doubting yourself. You are not weak because you struggle. You are weak only if you refuse to evolve. Only if you keep choosing familiarity over growth. Only if you confuse comfort with peace. Because peace is earned on the other side of discipline. And the world doesn't reward potential. It rewards pressure-tested execution. And I decided I will be pressure-proof. Not loud, not flashy, not arrogant, just relentless, because the strongest people are not the angriest. They are the most consistent. And one day soon, quietly, unexpectedly, you will wake up and realize that what once overwhelmed you now feels manageable. That what once scared you now feels small. And that's when you'll understand. You didn't become stronger overnight. You became stronger every time. You didn't quit when no one was watching. Every time you chose action over emotion. Every time you kept your word in silence. And that is why I can say this without shouting, without proving, without asking you to believe me. I am not weak anymore. Because weakness was a phase, not an identity. And it ended the moment I decided that my future deserved more than my excuses. And if you think that's where it ends, you're wrong. Because strength doesn't arrive as a finish line. It arrives as a new responsibility. The responsibility to never return to who you were when quitting felt justified. Because once you wake up, you can't unsee the truth. And the truth is this. Most people don't fail because they're incapable. They fail because they keep giving temporary emotions the authority to make permanent decisions. And I revoked that authority completely. I stopped letting bad days define my identity. I stopped letting slow progress convince me I was stuck. I stopped letting other people's timelines bully my patience. Because comparison is just insecurity wearing someone else's success as a weapon. And I refused to bleed from wounds that weren't even mine. So I detached. Not emotionally numb, but strategically distant. Because distance creates perspective, and perspective creates power. And power is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just shows up consistently until resistance gives up trying. And somewhere along the way, I realized something brutal but freeing. Nobody is coming to save you. No perfect moment. No magical motivation. No sudden confidence boost. Just you and the decision to stop living like your life is a rehearsal. Because weak people rehearse. Strong people perform even when the script isn't perfect. And I performed on days I felt empty. I performed when results were invisible. I performed when self-doubt screamed louder than logic. Because discipline is not confidence-driven. It is commitment-driven. And commitment doesn't need applause. It needs repetition. And repetition builds identity. And identity rewires behavior. And behavior shapes destiny. And this is how weakness dies. Not in a dramatic battle, but in starvation. When you stop feeding it attention, excuses, sympathy, and delay, because weakness thrives on being understood, while strength thrives on being executed. And the more I executed, the less I explained. The less I complained, the less I cared about being misunderstood, because being misunderstood is the tax you pay for becoming uncommon. And I accepted that tax gladly, because the cost of staying weak was far higher. It cost self-respect. It cost time. It cost the version of me I could have been. And I refuse to be haunted by a ghost of my own potential. So now, when resistance shows up, I don't fight it emotionally. I override it mechanically. Action first, feelings later. Because feelings catch up to momentum. not the other way around. And momentum is built by showing up when motivation is absent. And that's the formula nobody sells, because it's boring and uncomfortable and brutally honest. And honesty is threatening to people who live on excuses. But I don't live there anymore. I moved out permanently. I burned the return address. And if you're listening to this and something inside you feels exposed, that's not offense, that's recognition. Because the strongest version of you is already awake. It's just been waiting for you to stop protecting your weakness like it's a wounded friend. Because weakness doesn't need compassion. It needs replacement. Replacement with standards, structure, and self-respect. And once those take root, everything changes. Your walk, your silence, your patience, your tolerance for nonsense, and one day people will say you changed, and you'll smile quietly. Because you didn't change. You finally stopped betraying yourself. And that's why this isn't a motivation.